Hope everyone's having a great start to their year. Goals are going well. Even if they're not, that's okay. Every day is a new day. You can always reset and keep moving forward from that new starting point. So don't beat yourself up too much. I know this week can be a challenge because it's probably the first week when people start really questioning their resolutions, their goals, whether or not they can do this. So remember to keep focused on the habits, not the outcome, and build on that. It's very easy sometimes we set goals of frequency a little too high too quickly. So maybe you set out saying that you were going to get to the gym, you know, 5 days a week because you were going to do it every day after work, and you're beating yourself up because you only made it twice. Um, the fact is you, instead of beating yourself up for missing 3 days, encourage yourself for making it 2 days. Because if you were doing nothing and now you're going 2 days a week, that is a huge step forward. And, and not just from a figurative standpoint, but you know, there's research studies that show the difference between 0 days of working out and 2 or 3 days of working out has a all mortality decrease by 15 to 30%. So give yourself credit for what you're doing well rather than beating yourself up about what you're not yet doing or what you may be doing wrong still. These habits, these changes, it takes time to get it instilled. So focus on the process of getting to where you want to be, not just the outcome. Because the first couple weeks, the scale is going to be all over the place as your body is responding to all the new things you're doing to it. If exercise is very, very new to you, there can be a inflammation response, which can often cause with some additional water retention in response to that, especially if you're already struggling with circulation issues like blood pressure and things of that nature, where your body's already showing that it's having some issues regulating water pressure balance and within the body itself. So don't beat yourself up. If you're putting in some work, congratulate yourself and identify what the next step is to get a little bit closer to your ideal. You know, going from nothing to ideal is a very hard process. And oftentimes we try and get there too hard too quickly and just beat ourselves up about not being there yet rather than giving ourselves credit for how far we've already come. Um, so we did have a question last week, came up after we closed out. It talked about getting back into the gym after a pause, whether it be holidays, vacations, whatever. Tendons are very tender. So rather than muscle being sore, they're saying it feels like more like joints and connective tissue are sore. Um, Not an ideal thing. So one of the things that we have to be cautious about, if you have worked out before, but it's been a little bit of time off, you can't always expect to come in at full tilt at the exact level of where you left off at, because we're always going to have a little bit of drop off in performance. Usually endurance and stamina first, and then we'll see some strength decline secondary. But a lot of that depends upon how consistent for how long you were prior to that break. The longer you've been consistent, the more resistant strength decline is. But we're always going to see a little bit of drop off on stamina and endurance. Um, so, a rule of thought is when you're just getting back into it, you may want to back off 10-20% of whatever level you were at before, especially with the weights. Um, get back into your routine first for a week or two before you start kind of pushing hard and heavy. The other factor for that is um, strength adaptations are across all tissues, not just the muscle tissues, but you have your connective tissues, the tendons, the ligaments, even the bones themselves. Muscles react and respond much quicker than the connective tissue does. So sometimes, we had that fall off. We lost some muscle, we lost some strength, we get back in. First week of consistency, muscle starts responding really quickly again, and we're feeling good and strong, but our connective tissue hasn't quite caught up with that yet. So, come at it slow, give yourself, if it's been more than 2 weeks that you've been off, you may want to give yourself a couple weeks before you start really pushing hard again at or above the level that you left off at, just to let the connective tissues kind of get up to speed again. Another thing to kind of keep in mind, especially in terms of if we were off for like holidays, vacations, any sort of thing where our nutrition and our intake is probably a way off of what the norm is, we may be looking at some additional inflammatory responses that are still lingering. So, if you're eating a lot of junk or a lot of alcohol, a lot of heavily processed sugars, things that are very pro-inflammatory in the body, all of your inflammation responses are going to go, full 10 with any stimulus, especially if you're someone that's already prone to inflammation to begin with. So I'm talking like previous injuries. Maybe you already have arthritis. For something like with my degenerative disc disease, I have to be careful about how inflammatory I let my diet get, because the slightest little thing will start setting everything off. So that's something to kind of be mindful too when we're coming back in off of, you know, potentially a good week, 2 weeks of heavy inflammation stimulating foods in our diet. We want to be careful how hard we push that first week back in the gym, because that inflammation response is still there. It's going to go up higher, making a lot of those joints and connective sites more tender than what they would typically from the same level of workout. Um, and I'd probably wrap all of this up in saying, if for any reason you're noticing a lot of pain, discomfort of any kind with your training, um, I always advise double checking with doctor or physical therapist just to be sure something isn't absolutely wrong. Um, Sometimes, when you're off for a while, things develop, things happen that you don't notice because you're not heavily loading or using it. Things might be out of alignment, something might have torn that you didn't notice when you were doing some, unfamiliar things on vacation. Um, Playing with people that you're not used to playing with, things of that nature, lifting luggage, stuff like that. Um, all of that can cause a potential for injury that you may not be aware of. And if you start feeling regular discomfort from your workouts, we want to mitigate that as soon as possible and be sure that it isn't actual damaged tissue, just to be sure that we're not going to create a worse and bigger injury by continuing to push through it and ignore it. Um, so that's kind of my advice with most of that. Like I said, anything that you start noticing that becomes extremely acute or consistently chronic, you definitely want to get it checked just to be sure that it isn't something more severe that'll, if ignored, end up impeding your training more so for the longer term than the break that you just came off of. I hope that answered your question. If you'd like a little bit more, feel free to throw follow-up questions in the chat. Um, if you're watching this on the replay, you're always welcome to throw in questions in between. We always get to them in the next week's Q&A for everyone. Let's see here. We covered all that. Talked about being persistent with sticking to your goals. Again, don't beat yourself up about what you're not doing. Congratulate yourself on what you are doing now that you weren't at the beginning of the year, and keep moving forward. Small changes bring about big results if you stay consistent with them. That's really the difference between people who see success and don't, is they just simply keep going rather than being defeated with one setback or the other, or the fact that they're not there yet. I think that's the biggest challenge, is too much media creates the expectation that losing 20, 30, 40 pounds in 2 to 3 months is the norm, when it really isn't. 1 to 2 pounds is really what we want to see on average. So don't expect to see, 10 pounds when we're 2 weeks in to the new year. 4 is awesome. You're definitely on track. And to be honest, if you're 10 pounds down at this point, I would want to make sure that we're not doing anything unhealthy or overly unsustainable. Because again, if it's unhealthy or it's unsustainable, it means the goals probably aren't going to stick around with you, because you're either going to give up on the program, or we're going to end up having to take a lot of time off because of a health issue at some point in the future. So just bear that in mind. Small, consistent changes will last longer because they're easier to keep and maintain over the long haul, and create an actual lifestyle around it, rather than doing a quick fix cut program that you just can't wait till you're done with. So that's my 2 cents. Feel free, throw in the comments. We'll have more discussion next week. In the meantime, have a great week, and remember to stay persistent in your consistent pursuit of health.